My wealthy husband passed away and didn't leave me a penny. I was furious, but I had no choice but to cling to the thighs of my two stepsons. The younger son, Ryan, was sweet and clingy without any rebelliousness of a high school boy at all. However, the older son, Kason, was cold and hostile towards me. He didn't even allow me to step into his president's office. I thought he hated me to the extreme until the night of the funeral. Ryan had red eyes, looking aggrieved and pitiful. "Stepmom, I'm scared. Can I sleep in your arms?" And in the middle of the night, Kason climbed onto my bed. "Since he can, why can't I?" "Stepmom, don't be partial. My 60-year-old wealthy husband suddenly died of a heart attack. The will was very clear. All the property was to be divided equally between Ryan and Kason. That meant he didn't leave me a single penny. I was so angry whenever I thought about it, but I had to pretend that I didn't have any grudges and cling to the thighs of my two stepsons instead. Ryan was in his senior year of high school. He was sweet and clingy, always acting coquettishly towards me with his soft voice. He didn't reject my existence and even relied on me a lot. The difficult one was Kason. He took over the family business at the age of 24 and was quite tough in business. Moreover, he had always been very prejudiced against me. He didn't even allow me to set foot in his president's office. I bit my lip and quickly got out of bed. The top priority was to please Kason. I carried the cooked bird's nest soup and gently knocked on Kason's door. There was no response. The door was slightly ajar and opened a small gap because of my action. I waited at the door for a while, thinking that Kason wasn't in. The curtains were drawn tightly and the light in the room was dim. I was just about to put down the porcelain bowl and leave when my steps suddenly stopped because of a gasp. It was low and hoarse, mixed with intense and urgent lust. Almost in the next second, I realized what it meant. My eyes got used to the darkness. I saw that Kason's suit was well tailored. The buttons of his shirt were fastened neatly up to the top one. His well-cut suit pants wrapped around his muscular thighs. He looked noble and decent. However, his long, cold white fingers were half-clenched. The light blue veins on the back of his hands were bulging, covering a small piece of lace fabric. It was a grotesque and messy sight. Such a contrasting picture seemed to intensify the subtle smell in the air. My cheeks burned and even my nerves seemed to be on fire. Until Kason's hot muffled groan came again. I turned around as if I had been electrocuted and fled in a hurry. I walked quickly all the way and prayed in my heart that Kason hadn't noticed my interruption. It wasn't until I saw Ryan squatting in front of my bedroom door that my heartbeat gradually calmed down as my attention shifted. Ryan was hugging a pillow with red eyes. He looked like a big abandoned dog. "Where have you been?" My breathing was a bit disordered for a moment. I put down the bird's nest soup in my hand and said softly, "I was hungry and went downstairs to cook some midnight snack. Do you want to have some, Ayu?" Ryan stood up and his eyes fell on my fingertips. Only then did I notice that because I had walked too fast, the bird's nest soup had spilled onto my hands. Ryan stood up and nodded. Then he held my wrist and lifted it to his lips, bent down and took my fingertips into his mouth. His hot and wet tongue licked them lingeringly. My pupils dilated slightly and I quickly pulled my hand back. There was a hint of warning in my tone. "Ayu, what are you doing?" Ryan blinked innocently and looked at me blankly. "It's dirty and I didn't bring any paper. I just wanted to help you." The reason was reasonable, but there was also an indescribable strangeness. However, the boy's eyes were too clear. Instead, I felt that I was being too sensitive. "No, it's okay." My fingers curled up unconsciously. There seemed to be Ryan's temperature still remaining on them. He put his arm around my waist very naturally and buried his head in my neck. His voice was aggrieved and pitiful. "Can I sleep here with you tonight? I'm scared to be alone. Can we sleep in each other's arms like before?" Ryan was 17 years old this year and had already grown to 186 centimeters. Through the thin fabric of my pajamas, I could clearly feel his firm muscles and broad frame. The young and strong hormones made me feel a bit hot in the face. "Ryan." I pushed him gently. Ryan didn't move. Instead, he hugged me even tighter. He clung to me, whining and refusing to let go. I sighed helplessly and continued on my own. "You've grown up. It's not like when you were a kid. This isn't appropriate." Ryan's biological mother divorced the old man just 3 years after giving birth to him. So when Ryan had nightmares as a child, he would run to my room. His voice was muffled and he acted coquettishly in a familiar way. "I don't care. I want to." Ryan's stubborn and proud attitude suddenly made me feel that he was still a little kid who didn't understand anything. Some of my concerns dissipated. I couldn't help laughing and rubbed his head. Ryan lowered his eyes, seeming to be very hurt by my rejection. "I didn't have a mother since I was a child, and now I don't have a father either. I only have you." He always knew how to make me soft-hearted. I pursed my lips. "All right, but never again." Ryan's eyes lit up and he was just about to pull me into the room. Kason appeared on the stairs at some point, looking down at us from above. His clothes were neat and exquisite. It seemed that those embarrassing and blush-inducing scenes just now were all my illusions. "Ryan, go back to your own bedroom. His voice was calm, but it revealed an irresistible deterrence. I subconsciously broke free from Ryan's hand and a strange sense of guilt welled up in my heart. The two brothers had different mothers and had never been on good terms. But now the company was in Kaysen's hands. It would be really unwise for Ryan to have a conflict with him over such a trifle. Subconsciously, I took sides with the weaker Ryan and quickly smoothed things over. Don't quarrel with your brother. Be obedient and go back quickly. Ryan looked at me with wet eyes. Do you not want me anymore either? My heart softened completely and I whispered, wait until he leaves and then come quietly. Ryan's eyes darkened a little and he smiled obediently. Okay. Only Kaysen and I were left in the corridor. He gave me a cold look and walked away slowly. He was distant and indifferent, as if he didn't deign to say one more word to me, but was extremely polite at the same time. This just right sense of distance was even more depressing than blatant contempt. Because you clearly knew that he came from a good family and was superior from the bottom of his heart. I watched his tall back and punched the air furiously out of helplessness. Who knew that Kaysen suddenly turned around? I tidied my long hair in a flustered manner and forced a stiff smile. What's the matter? Kaysen smiled unhurriedly. A piece of clothing fell onto my balcony. I think it might be yours. He took out a piece of fabric that was folded neatly from the pocket of his well-pressed suit pants and handed it to me. He looked calm. I took it and my breath hitched when I saw it clearly. It was white and lace. It was still warm and damp. Compared to the embarrassment of having my underwear in my stepson's hand, what made my nerves even more tense was that I seemed to have just seen this scene somewhere. I was so tired from arranging the funeral these days. I was lying on the bed, thinking about things, and gradually dozed off in a daze. There was a knock on the door. I instinctively thought it was Ryan, so I turned over and mumbled, the door isn't locked. Come in. The footsteps got closer. I half closed my eyes and patted the pillow beside me. Sleep here. Don't grab my quilt. A pair of slightly cool hands touched my waist. The sudden temperature difference made my skin shiver. I frowned and turned around. My muddled brain instantly qingxing, and it seemed that all the blood in my body was flowing backwards. Kaysen slightly raised his eyebrows and chuckled. What are you afraid of? I subconsciously shrank back and stammered to explain. I thought it was Ryan. You get out quickly. His body covered mine again and he forcibly pinned me in his arms. Since he can, why can't I? Stepmom, don't be partial. Kaysen's dark eyes were filled with indistinguishable emotions. The action of pressing my wrists was highly oppressive. This was the first time he called me stepmom. The title that originally symbolized the seniority, at this moment, soaked by his hoarse voice, became especially charming and thought-provoking. I was stunned and my thoughts were in a mess. I had no idea how to deal with it at all. Just at this moment, Ryan's voice came from outside the door. Can I come in? I anxiously tried to break Kaysen's fingers. Let me go. Kaysen calmly closed his eyes. The arm around my waist tightened again and his voice was tinged with sleepiness. Vivian, I'm so tired. Let me hold you for a while. Just for a while. I seemed to be under a spell and forgot to resist for a moment. Fortunately, Ryan was always obedient. Without getting my response, the footsteps outside gradually faded away. Kaysen rubbed his cheek against mine and the muscles pressed against my back relaxed. I listened to his steady breathing and carefully turned around. In the faint moonlight, Kaysen's sharp facial features became softer, but the world in the dream was still not very peaceful. There was a shallow wrinkle between his eyebrows. I was a bit dazed for a moment, thinking that I had gone back to the time when Kaysen just returned to the Chi family. Perhaps it was because it was easy to be emotional in the middle of the night. My heart softened bit by bit. I raised my hand to tuck him in. Kaysen opened his eyes sensitively. His voice was hoarse with tiredness. Not even for a while? My heart twitched imperceptibly for a moment. I patted his back gently as if coaxing a child. Go to sleep. I'm here. Kaysen slept soundly, but I couldn't fall asleep. Actually, our relationship wasn't so hostile before. On the contrary, Kaysen used to rely on me even more than Ryan did. Kaysen was born to the old man's first wife. After the second wife, Ryan's mother, entered the family, he was completely abandoned by the old man. Kaysen moved into the attic. There was no driver to pick him up or send him to school anymore. He wasn't even allowed to sit at the dining table to eat. When I married into the Chi family, I didn't even know that there was an eldest young master in the family. The students and teachers in the elite school were all shrewd people. Kaysen became the target of amusement for the senior students, and the teachers just turned a blind eye. He soon became violent and gloomy and was used to solving problems with his fists. When the head teacher called me to complain and asked me to go to the office for a face-to-face talk, it was the first time I met Kaysen. There was a blood scab at the corner of his mouth. He stood there with his eyes downcast. The teacher kept complaining about Kaysen's bad behavior of fighting. Kaysen raised his head expressionlessly and interrupted impatiently. Are you my father's new wife? Then you can stay and handle it. Whether it's expulsion or punishment, I don't care. I'm leaving first. I grabbed his wrist and frowned. Let's go to the hospital first. The teacher looked puzzled, but due to my status, he had to ask in a humble way, he just has a small injury. It's not serious. Miss Vivian, the parents of the injured child are still making a fuss in the principal's office. Do you think you should first? At that time, I had accompanied the old man to many social occasions and had learned how the rich people showed their power without getting angry. So I just gave the teacher a casual look and smiled. My husband donates tens of millions to the school every year. Do I really have to deal with such a trifle myself? Before I came, I had already checked the surveillance. They were at fault first in this matter. Our Kaysen was just acting in self-defense. Has your school become so unreasonable that it judges right or wrong just based on the injuries? If you have this attitude, then there's no need for us to continue communicating. Next, the legal department of our group will directly communicate with the school. After saying that, I ignored the teacher's continuous apologies and turned around to leave. After walking a few steps, I stopped. Kaysen didn't follow me. He looked at me silently, and his eyelashes trembled. I thought he was too embarrassed to ask me for help, so I went back and lifted the hem of his school uniform pants. Is your leg injured? Kaysen slapped my hand away and spat out 2 words coldly, no. Then he walked past me quickly and went out. He was tall and had long legs. 1 step of his was equivalent to 2 or 3 steps of mine. I couldn't even catch up with him. After leaving the school, he walked straight past the luxury car parked in front of him and headed for the bus stop. I had to take off my high heels and hold them in my hand, then trotted to stop him. Didn't you hear me calling you so many times? Kaysen smiled sarcastically and his eyes fell on my high heels. You're quite good at acting. No wonder you're the only one who married into the family in all these years. My marriage was a perfect example of crossing classes. I had heard too many malicious remarks like this, and I had long been immune to them, and I didn't plan to argue with a rebellious young boy. Whatever you say. Get in the car and let's go to the hospital. Kaysen took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, shook out one and put it in his mouth. The lighter produced a deep blue flame and the smoke dispersed. He took a deep puff, and his brows were full of impatience. There's no one watching here. You don't need to act anymore. The scene in the office just now was enough to move my father. Stop following me, okay? If you keep following me, I'll sell you off. I took a cigarette from the cigarette box in his hand, stood on tiptoe and leaned forward, lighting it with his cigarette. The distance was suddenly pulled closer, and Kaysen was stunned. I blew a smoke ring in his face and couldn't help laughing when I saw him coughing constantly. Do you think I need to act with you? Still talking about selling me off. Kid, who are you trying to scare? That day, I grabbed his ear and took him to the hospital for a full physical examination. After getting the results, I exaggeratedly called the principal to hold them accountable. I forced the boys who had beaten Kaysen to come over on crutches and with bandages, bowing and apologizing to Kaysen. On the way home, he was unusually quiet. When going upstairs, Kaysen said softly, "Thank you." There was a kind of awkwardness and loneliness unique to a child lacking love in his tone. Later, I persuaded the old man to let me educate Kaysen. I personally supervised his studies, taught him about worldly wisdom, and helped him hold the fort at parent-teacher meetings. Kaysen shed his fierce temper and gradually became calm and refined. He began to look forward to my praise, would bring me milk tea and cakes after school every day, and when he went to auctions with the old man, he would remember to buy me jewelry. When he was sick, he would stretch out his hands towards me and call me Vivian sullenly. I scolded him for being disrespectful. He just calmly changed the topic. I'm so tired. Let me hug you again. When did all this start to change? It seemed to be in Kaysen's senior year of high school. The old man's health was deteriorating day by day. As the only heir of the right age, Kaysen began to take over the family business, and Ryan was arranged by the old man to study abroad in high school and was clamoring to go home every day. During that period, I was running between the hospital and the company every day, so busy that I hardly had time to touch the ground. Occasionally, I had to fly overseas to visit Ryan. So much so that I forgot Kaysen's birthday. When I received Kaysen's call, I was picking up Ryan at the airport. He hung up the phone before I could finish explaining. When I got home, the butler told me that Kaysen had moved to the company to live and wouldn't come back. From that day on, Kaysen started to talk to me in a businesslike tone. Cold, polite, full of condescending and unfeeling, but I knew that he'd just changed his way and shrank back into the shell he used to be in. When I woke up in the morning, the bedside was already empty. I tidied up and went downstairs. Ryan turned his head, biting a slice of bread when he heard the sound. I was just about to sit beside him and find a reason to explain. Kaysen pulled out the chair on the right and poured a glass of warm milk and handed it to me. The whole set of actions was done smoothly and naturally, making me subconsciously take it. Thank you. I took a sip of the milk and had no choice but to sit down beside Kaysen. Kaysen nodded and resumed his usual taciturn appearance. Ryan looked at me in disbelief and was obviously even angrier. I picked up the knife and fork, cut the bacon on the plate, and pushed it in front of Ryan. Don't be angry. Ryan snorted coldly and reluctantly said, oh. I felt a bit of a headache and also wanted to laugh. How old are you? Still sulking with me? Ryan glanced at Kason, and his tone was a bit sarcastic. So what? Some people are old but are even more fussy than me. I'm already being very reasonable, okay? I quickly agreed along with his words. Our Ryan is the most sensible and the best behaved. The other day when I met Mrs. Wong and the others, everyone praised you for being able to handle things. When the old man was critically ill, Kason happened to be on a business trip. The board of directors and a large group of relatives who seemed to pop up out of nowhere were eyeing me covetously and all took me as a target. Although I had sat in the position of vice president with the old man's support, after all, I wasn't from the Chi family and didn't hold any shares. Once the old man fell ill, no one really looked up to me. It was Ryan who flew back to City A overnight to fend off the troubles for me and stabilize the situation. Ryan was appeased, the corners of his mouth lifted but he forcibly suppressed it. It was okay. My performance that day was just so. I held back my laughter. Kason, who hadn't said a word all along, suddenly spoke without warning. Am I not good? I was stunned. Kason looked at me seriously, his tone was flat, and he repeated again. I said, am I not good? This adjective didn't suit Kason. Moreover, he didn't seem to be joking at all. I curled my fingers. Of course you're good too. Kason slightly curved his lower lip, but there was no smile in his eyes. Really? It was a somewhat aggressive rhetorical question. I couldn't figure out what he meant for a moment. The atmosphere suddenly cooled down. The servant came out of the kitchen and shook the thermos flask, breaking the silence. Sir, there isn't enough milk. Do you need some more? Kason stood up, casually took my remaining milk and took a sip. No need to bother. The lipstick mark on the rim of the cup faded in color because of his covering it. I slightly widened my eyes. Kason walked out without any change in his expression. The servant was stunned for a moment and then began to clear Kason's seat. I restrained my emotions and looked at Ryan. Your brother has been really busy lately. He even accidentally took the wrong cup. Ryan frowned and didn't say anything. The servant tactfully echoed, Madam, if Mr. Chi comes back tonight, I'll make some tonics for him. I waved my hand. Don't put sea cucumbers in it. He doesn't like the smell. It really seemed like just a small accident. But I couldn't stop thinking about the picture of his lips precisely fitting the lip print in my mind. Exactly right, as if it were a kiss. A month after the funeral, my life finally returned to normal. When I had free time, I would make appointments with a few sisters to play mahjong and drink. Mrs. Wong drew a tile and couldn't stop smiling. Oh, I'm going to win again. I casually played a 3 bamboo tile and lamented, I'm really having bad luck today. Mrs. Lee leaned over and nudged me with her elbow, smiling narrowly. What's there for you to be unhappy about? You're young, wealthy, and your husband has passed away. I'd say you're the most carefree among us. All right. I'll introduce a few young guys for you to have fun with tonight. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That old man didn't leave me a penny. Mrs. Wong was busy winning the game and only heard the last sentence. Oh my God, that can't be true. Old Chi usually treated you like a treasure. Besides, with his wealth, even if he didn't give you real power, he wouldn't be so stingy as to not leave you a penny. I rubbed my temples, feeling a bit annoyed in my heart. At first I didn't believe it either, but it was clearly written in black and white in the will. Mrs. Lee cursed him as a scumbag and rolled her eyes. Men are really heartless. Fortunately, your younger son is quite affectionate towards you. He won't leave you alone in the future. But your older son? The waiter opened the door of the private room. Kason gently knocked on the door frame. Mrs. Lee abruptly stopped what she was about to say and shut her mouth tightly. I looked up and was a bit puzzled. Why are you here? He hadn't come home to live since that day. It's raining outside. I'm here to take you home. You could just ask your assistant to send an umbrella. There's no need to come here in person. I paused my hand that was about to draw a tile, without showing any emotion on my face. Why was Kason so clear about my schedule? He even knew details like whether I had an umbrella or not. Kason had no intention of leaving and just waited behind me. Because of his presence, the several ladies became a bit reserved. I didn't want to spoil everyone's fun, so I played a few rounds and then got up to say goodbye. Coincidentally, the waiter led 2 male models in. Mrs. Lee winked at me. Have a piece of mango before you leave. The male model was quite smart and immediately held the fruit plate and fed it to me. Sister. Kason separated me from the male model and said faintly, she's allergic to mango. Perhaps because Kason's face was too gloomy, the male model was too scared to move. Mrs. Lee stood up to smooth things over. Oh, it's my bad memory. I tugged at Kason's sleeve to signal him to step aside and smiled to ease the atmosphere. It's okay. I think these strawberries look quite fresh. I'll try a strawberry. Before I could reach out to take one, Kason picked up a strawberry and fed it into my mouth extremely naturally. I froze for a moment and then bit it. A few drops of pink juice flowed onto Kaysen's well-defined fingers. His fair fingertips somehow looked ascetic. Do you like strawberries? Then I'll buy you some more on the way back. The ordinary conversation coming out of his mouth somehow had a hint of indulgence. Everyone looked at each other in surprise. I smiled awkwardly, said goodbye, and left in a hurry. I felt like there was a lump in my chest and it was stuffy. I walked ahead without saying a word, and Kaysen followed slowly behind with my bag. When crossing the road, a little girl in a tutu dress handed over a rose. Brother, would you like to buy a flower? If sister is angry, buy a flower to coax her. I blushed and hurriedly said, little kid, we're not. Ryan squatted down and took the rose. Can she be coaxed if we buy it? The little girl excitedly nodded, her voice clear. Mom said that girls all like roses. Then Kaysen bought a whole bunch of roses and gave them to me. I'll see if the little kid's words work. The little girl skipped away. I looked at Kaysen and suddenly realized where that indescribable strangeness came from. There was nothing wrong with the conversation itself. The problem was the context. Those words were suitable for a couple, not for a mother and son. I took a deep breath. Kaysen, why didn't you explain to her that we're not a couple just now? Kaysen's black eyes were calm, and he smiled casually. Does it matter? Just a strange little kid. What's the difference between saying it and not saying it? I closed my eyes and was at a loss for words for a moment. Chi-Yuan stuffed the flowers into my hands, held the umbrella handle, and took 2 steps back. They're very pretty. I didn't say anything and just opened the car door by myself and sat in, casually throwing the bouquet in the back. Chi-Yuan's gloomy eyes lingered on the scattered petals for a moment. Don't you like red roses? Then I'll buy you champagne-colored ones next time. Kaysen, you're so smart. You clearly know what I mean. There shouldn't be any intimate actions between us. You've crossed the line. I always thought I was overthinking before, but now I think it's necessary for me to remind you. The smile on Chi-Yuan's lips disappeared, and intense emotions surged in his eyes. Ryan can, why can't I? I was on the verge of breaking down. Is that the point? I explained it to you a long time ago. I don't understand why you just don't believe me. You two are the same to me. Chi-Yuan turned the car into a small alley nearby and suddenly stepped on the brakes. I don't distrust you. It took me a while to react, thinking that the communication had finally gotten back on track. Then why did you shut yourself off and have been doing all these strange things lately? Chi-Yuan's expression was cold and he said in a low voice, but just because it's the same, I'm very unhappy. I want it to be different. The hard-to-say answer was on the verge of coming out at this moment. Kaysen, what nonsense are you talking about? I was stunned, scared by the intense obsession in his eyes. I'm saying that I want you to love me. Chi-Yuan raised his hand, grasped my wrist, pulled me into his arms, and bent down to kiss me. It was fierce and urgent. All the superficial disguises were torn off. He plundered without restraint, as if releasing the desire that had been suppressed for many years. Our skins were closely pressed together, and I clearly felt his swelling heat. A vague memory in my mind seemed to trigger a certain button and popped up. That night, he was using my underwear. I slapped Chi-Yuan. We're family. Chi-Yuan stretched out his tongue and licked his lips as if reminiscing and smiled contentedly. So we're the most suitable for each other. I couldn't stay in the same space with Chi-Yuan anymore. I got out of the car and hailed a taxi. I looked at the flowing night scenery outside the window and began to reflect on myself. Why didn't I notice the abnormality earlier? Obviously before the funeral, Chi-Yuan was still that heir who was so insane that he was almost rigid. As my thoughts rewound, I remembered those ambiguous moments that seemed to exist and yet didn't. Chi-Yuan had always been sensitive. Had he really not noticed my presence when he masturbated? He was so fastidious about cleanliness. How could he just happen to kiss my sticky lip print? And that night, why did he show vulnerability in front of me, which was completely out of character for him? I realized a terrifying fact. Chi-Yuan was using my feelings for him to test my bottom line bit by bit. The funeral was just a turning point, not the starting point. The old man died, and he no longer had any scruples. So it wasn't that I finally noticed his abnormal love. It was that he finally didn't have to pretend anymore. When the old man married me, he was already the richest man in City A. At that time, I was 19 years old and just a waiter carrying plates in a club that he gave me money, status, and an education. Rather than a husband, he was more like a mentor. It was he who transformed me from a vulgar, shallow, and ordinary person with only good looks into a company representative envied by everyone. This was also why, although he didn't leave me a penny, I couldn't hate him and was still willing to take care of his 2 sons wholeheartedly. However, the huge gap in status also meant that I was in an absolutely weak position in this relationship. Once, because I didn't know how to taste wine and made a fool of myself in public, the old man asked me to offer a drink to all the distinguished guests on the yacht as an apology. That day, I vomited so much that I got alcohol poisoning and was hospitalized. It was Kaysen who stayed by my side for 2 days and 2 nights without sleeping, and after school every night, he took me to the wine cellar to tutor me. The old man didn't often go home. Whenever those mistresses came to the door, it was always Kaysen who stood in front of me. Once, an emotional young model suddenly rushed out and was about to splash sulfuric acid on my face. Kaysen subconsciously hugged me, resulting in serious burns on his back. Because of my poor background, I was often ostracized by the upper class. And the first thing Kaysen did after taking a high position was to take me to the shareholders' meeting and unconditionally support my projects. Over the years, Kaysen's protection of me was no less than mine of him. Perhaps the wind was too strong, making my eyes feel sour. I suddenly had an urge to cry. Because I found that even though I clearly recognized Chi Yuan's dark side and understood his despicable thoughts, I couldn't bring myself to abandon him and just leave. The butler called me. "Will you and the young master come back for dinner tonight?" I sniffed and controlled my voice. "Is Ryan not at home again?" Ryan had often stayed out all night these days. The older one had ulterior motives, and the younger one was also a headache. "The young master went out this morning and hasn't come back yet." I got it. I dialed Ryan's driver's number. "Where's Ryan?" "Madam, the young master is at the bar." When I found him, the atmosphere in the private room was lively. A drunk boy staggered out, leaning on the wall. Through the chaotic crowd, I saw Ryan lying alone in the corner. His hand was covering his eyes, looking dejected and world-weary. For a moment, I didn't even dare to go in and recognize him. Was this still my cute and lively Ryan? "Brother Chi, come and play. We're just waiting for you." Annoying. Get lost. Ryan impatiently kicked that person. Hey. You should tell us who it is that's torturing you like this." "Yeah, Brother Chi. With your conditions, what kind of woman can't you get? Is it really necessary to be like this? What type is sister-in-law? Brothers will give you some advice." Ryan took a sip of wine. "She's beautiful, smart, and tough on the outside but soft-hearted." "Beautiful? Is she as beautiful as your stepmother?" "To be honest, I've always thought it was a pity that she didn't debut as an actress." Ryan put down his wine glass, and it was hard to make out the emotions in his eyes. "No one can be more beautiful than her." There was a moment of silence in the air, and then a huge exclamation rang out. "Damn it. Don't tell me you're in love with your stepmother." Among the continuous questioning, I clenched the strap of my bag tightly, my back stiff. My mind was in a terrible mess. I felt cold all over. Until the guy who had left and then came back slurred his words as he greeted me. "Hi, you're here. Are you looking for Ryan? What's going on? Why are you all just standing there like idiots? What's the matter?" Finally, everyone noticed me standing at the door. Ryan suddenly raised his head and walked towards me. His voice was trembling badly. Let's go home." "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come home so late. I'm wrong for making you worry." He almost tripped over just a few steps. His words of apology were skirting around the main issue and repeating over and over again. Outside, I didn't want to embarrass him. But there were still things that needed to be said. I smiled and shook off his hand, looking him straight in the eye. "Ryan, don't be so rude like this in the future. You should call me mother. If you don't want to, at least call me aunt." In the dead silence, his eyes turned red. The atmosphere at home had quietly changed. Everyone maintained a superficial harmony and tacitly didn't mention that unspoken night. At the dinner table, Kaysen said in a deep voice, "Ryan, the procedures for school have been completed. I'll have someone send you back to Country M tomorrow." Ryan slammed down his chopsticks. "Why? Didn't we agree that I would transfer back to China?" Kaysen sneered coldly and slowly took out a stack of photos from the inner layer of his coat and threw them on the table. "Let you stay in China and fool around? Do you want to count how many times you've been to bars in the past few months since you came back on vacation?" Ryan gritted his back teeth. "I won't do it again in the future." Kaysen wiped the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief. "This matter has been decided. There's no room for negotiation." Ryan ignored the estrangement of these days and looked at me for help. I was silent for a moment and then said, "Let him stay in China. It's easier to discipline him when he's right in front of us. Besides, I've already criticized him for this matter." Kaysen stood up, his voice cold. "The flight is at 8:20 tomorrow night. You can go see him off." In the study, I couldn't help but question, why do you insist on sending him abroad? He's about to be in senior year of high school. He can't afford such back and forth. Although I was angry in my heart, I didn't want this to affect Ryan's grades. Kaysen paused, his hand holding the fountain pen, and didn't even raise his head. "I've said it. There's no room for negotiation." "I don't agree." He responded perfunctorily. I raised my voice. "I don't agree to him going abroad. Did you hear me? I'm his guardian." Kaysen smiled briefly, slowly closed the pen cap, and his eyes became gloomy. "You like him so much that you have to keep him by your side." I just thought Kaysen was being unreasonable. "I've said it. I'm worried about his exams." Kaysen approached me step by step until he pinned me against the wall. Worried about him? I thought you'd feel disgusted after hearing his confession, just like you did with me. What, you don't feel disgusted when it comes to him? My pupils trembled slightly, and I could hardly stand steadily. Sure enough, you've been having me followed. Kaysen, how dare you spy on me? You're crazy. Kaysen stared straight at me and said in a low voice, Vivian. Why can't you just hug me like you used to? I pushed hard against his chest. Wasn't I clear enough last time? It's impossible between you and me, and there's no possibility between me and Ryan either. Kaysen grasped both of my wrists with one hand, raised them above my head, and pressed them against the wall. But I'm determined to force it. He kissed me forcefully, and I was on the verge of suffocating. Kaysen's actions were so forceful that he held me tighter and tighter. I randomly kicked him in the knee. Kaysen grunted and let go of me. I raised the back of my hand and wiped my lips hard, my voice trembling badly. Kaysen, don't go crazy. I'm your father's wife and your nominal mother. Kaysen suddenly laughed, his tone cruel. So this is what you're worried about? You thought that old man had at least sincerely helped you, so you couldn't bring yourself to do something that would be considered ruining his son under worldly standards. Do you know why he married you so quickly and never touched you after marrying you? I turned pale and forced myself to calm down. He said my experiences reminded him of his younger self. Kaysen opened the drawer and handed me the key to the Buddhist hall on the top floor that had been sealed. My mother started from scratch with him, but in the end, he used her and sent her to the bed of his business partner. Ryan's mother didn't die because of physical weakness due to a difficult childbirth and finally couldn't be cured. She died of depression. That day, a city-level leader took a fancy to you. Those people in their group have always had wild ways and were especially interested in other men's wives. The old man originally planned to give you to him when you reached the legal age of marriage, but perhaps because he was old and had a sudden pang of conscience when he was on his deathbed. He didn't do that. Instead, he regarded you as a spiritual comfort to make up for his past sins. The evidence is all there. If you don't believe it, you can go and see for yourself. I looked at him silently. After a long while, I said softly, Kaysen, you tampered with the will, didn't you? You were afraid that I would leave this family, so you didn't leave me a penny. But that's not right. Perhaps it was because I didn't love the old man but only felt grateful to him, or perhaps it was because I had already seen too many sanctimonious people in the circle. I took these truths quite well. Compared to those dirty stories, what shocked me more was Kaysen's almost distorted love. It was grand yet crazy. I let out a breath. Love for someone shouldn't be like this. Whether it's spying or saying things that can hurt me like just now. This isn't love. You two only have the illusion that you can't leave me because your original families were distorted and you were too lacking in love when you were young. My calm performance obviously exceeded Kaysen's expectations. His body trembled violently, and he forced a smile. No. That's not the case. He rubbed his fingers over the key and pushed it back to its original position. The crisp sound of the key falling into the drawer was his final verdict. I thought that after the warning, you would come to your senses and we could get along as we used to. But now I think I was wrong in my judgment. Starting from tomorrow, the psychiatrist I contacted will come to take care of you too. Then I'll go abroad and settle down. If you dare to overstep the boundaries again or try to control me with those underhanded means, I naturally have ways to make sure you can't find me for the rest of your lives. You know that I always mean what I say. Kaysen's resistant mood dissipated after I said the last sentence. He backed away weakly again and again, his voice hoarse with bitterness. Okay. I'll listen to you, cooperate with the treatment, and learn to control myself. But please, don't disappear. Then I hope you'll do as you say. I straightened my back and remained expressionless. Back in my room, I slowly slumped to the ground and the false calmness collapsed in an instant. Just now, when I learned that the old man had wronged me, a secret sense of relief unexpectedly emerged in my heart. It seemed that mistakes could offset each other, and I no longer needed to feel guilty about morality. I had been displaced since childhood. For me, happiness was equivalent to money. Money could let me have a full meal and not have to beg, money could bring me dignity and protect me from being bullied, so I followed the old man without hesitation. After marriage, I wasn't willing to be just a vase, so I used his resources to climb up desperately. I craved money, and it was never enough. But when I really had everything I needed, the sense of insecurity in my heart was still growing louder and louder. It was even worse than before. I read a lot of books and met a lot of people. Then I gradually realized that happiness comes from being loved. But my family didn't love me, and the old man didn't love me either. It seemed that no one loved me except myself. Now I've finally got the passionate love that I've dreamed of in my life. But I have to push this love away. Vivian could be carefree, but as the heirs, they couldn't. In high positions, gossip could be deadly. What's more, they were still too young. I didn't doubt the sincerity of the young people, but sincerity is changeable. In 10 or 20 years, when I'm old and no longer beautiful, when they've met younger and more outstanding girls and come back to tell me that all of this was just an impulse caused by the Oedipus complex, At that time, how should I face myself? They were the only colors in the first half of my life. I didn't want to destroy the memories with my own hands and take the risk of facing a mess and being cursed at. I have to admit that I'm a coward. 3 years. I deliberately avoided the news from China and focused on running the independent brand I founded, until Kaysen got engaged, and as his only family member, I had to attend the banquet. On the private plane, I was flipping through the news about Kaysen's engagement on my tablet. In the photo, the young woman was snuggling up to his side, smiling sweetly. She was full of the youthful charm unique to a young girl. Kaysen stood straight, and the expensive custom-made suit outlined his perfect proportions. He was just a bit thinner, and his already three-dimensional facial features looked even more sharp as a result. With his cold expression, he gave off an aura that kept strangers away. I quietly stared at the photo for a while and then pressed the power off button. They were well matched in terms of family background, talent, and appearance. Most importantly, their identities and ages were suitable. They were a perfect match. I felt a bit stuffy in my chest and looked out at the sea of clouds outside the window. As the light and shadow changed, the glass reflected my well-maintained face. A ridiculous thought suddenly popped into my mind. Am I old at the age of 29? The plane landed. The driver opened the car door for me respectfully. Kaysen sat on the other side, farthest away from me. He was wearing a black inner layer and a long dark brown suit coat. I didn't expect that he would come to pick me up. After all, with Kaysen's current status, every minute and second of his time was invaluable. I was a bit stunned and said rather clumsily, "You look very handsome today." Kaysen didn't show much expression. "Thank you." The air fell silent. I smiled and didn't know what else to say. It turns out that it's quite easy to go from being extremely close to having nothing to talk about. There was a traffic jam on the elevated road, and the originally 15-minute journey was extended to 40 minutes. My old problem of getting carsick flared up again. I forced down the urge to vomit, and the discomfort in my chest got worse. In the rearview mirror, my face was pale. The driver was a bit panicked. "Madam, do you need to go to the hospital?" I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't say a word. Kaysen said faintly, "Drop me off at the intersection ahead. You take Madam to the hospital first." A slight sense of loss suddenly emerged in my heart. I couldn't help but think of the past when Kaysen would always prepare motion sickness medicine in advance and would accompany me to the hospital no matter how busy he was. I couldn't help but laugh at myself in my heart for being so useless. I should actually be happy. He now behaves appropriately and doesn't pay as much excessive attention to me as he did in the past. Getting carsick seemed to be a trigger that brought out the illnesses that had been building up in me over the years. I had a fever in the hospital for a whole week. The family dinner that had been originally scheduled was postponed again and again. It was said that Kaysen was busy preparing for the wedding banquet, so he didn't come to visit me even once. On the day when my fever went down, I asked my assistant, "Has the date for Kaysen's wedding been set?" The assistant stammered and told me that the engagement had been cancelled. I pressed my temples, thinking that I must have heard wrong. But for some reason, I felt relieved in my heart. Why was it cancelled for no reason? Mr. Chi has blocked the news, and I'm not really clear about the specific situation. It seems that Miss Lin took advantage of the engagement to swallow up several major projects of the Chi family. It's also said that she wanted to collude with the younger Mr. Chi to plot against Mr. Chi. Ryan? A thin layer of cold sweat broke out on my palms. Yes. According to the will, the younger Mr. Chi started taking over the company's business after graduating from university. But since he joined the board of directors, he's been opposing Mr. Chi all the time. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and sank into the soft pillow. Where's Ryan now? The younger Mr. Chi has been missing since 2 days ago. There are rumors outside that he was kidnapped by Mr. Chi. Everything was back on track. But everything was out of control. I held on to the edge of the bed and stood up. "Prepare the car. I'm going to see Kaysen. In the president's office." I got straight to the point. "Where's Ryan?" Kaysen undid 2 buttons on his shirt and said coldly, "Since he's done something wrong, he should be punished." My heart sank. "I don't object to you educating him. But he's your brother after all. Don't go too far and hurt him." I'm worried about Ryan's safety, and also worried that Kaysen will do something that he'll regret later. Kaysen slightly raised his eyebrows and smiled sarcastically. "Brother?" He has never regarded me as his elder brother. I took a few steps closer and said patiently, "Tell me where he is first. Whether it's right or wrong, let's sit down and have a good talk." Kaysen gave a very faint smile. "How annoying. After so many years, it's rare for you to take the initiative to come to see me." But it's for him. It seemed like self-mockery and also like self-abandonment. I was stabbed by the sadness in his eyes and my voice became unsteady. "It's not." Kaysen roughly pulled open his collar, but his tone was unusually calm. "I'm the one who got into trouble. Why don't you care about how I'm doing?" I froze on the spot, my breathing in chaos. Kaysen's body was covered with hideous scars. My hands were shaking. I wanted to touch them but stopped in midair. How did you get so injured? Kaysen looked up at me and curved the corner of his mouth. They joined forces and wanted to replace me. I played along and got engaged to that woman, setting a bait. Then I designed to get rid of Ryan's confidants and annexed the Lin family by the way. My eyes felt sour and I clearly felt my heart aching. Since you already knew they were going to plot against you, why did you have to risk yourself? With your abilities, couldn't you find a more comprehensive solution? I was both angry and anxious and tears couldn't help rolling down my cheeks. Ryan stared at me without blinking and said word by word, because, I missed you. Kaysen smiled bleakly, you said that I'm not allowed to go to you. But if you come to see me, does that mean it's not breaking the rules? He tried his best to maintain his calmness and his voice was restrained. I no longer expect your love. I just want you to take pity on me. I looked away, not daring to look at his broken eyes. Those big principles were stuck in my throat and I couldn't say them out at all. Kaysen carefully wiped away the tears from the corners of my eyes and his voice trembled slightly. Vivian, I'm in so much pain. Can you give me a hug? Just for a moment. My reason told me that I should leave. Then tell him to go to the doctor if he's in pain because a hug can't relieve the pain. But my feet seemed to be filled with lead and couldn't move. Kaysen tentatively hugged me and then held me tighter and tighter. Vivian, I've listened to you and seen the doctor properly. But the more I'm treated, the clearer I am that my love for you is not family affection. I haven't stopped missing you for a single day in these 3 years. I'm almost driven crazy by missing you. He pressed his lips tightly against my neck and said in a low voice, Vivian, I don't believe you have no feelings for me. Otherwise, why is your heart beating so fast? The warm touch was spreading. Our breaths mingled and we were so close. I shuddered and suddenly pushed him away. Kaysen, no. He grasped my wrist and slapped himself in the face. You can hit me or scold me. I'll accept it. Don't leave me again. I struggled to pull my hand back. My heart was beating so fast that it seemed to jump out of my chest. Kaysen looked at me seriously, his black eyes deep. I know you're afraid. But these 3 years are the best proof. I won't change my heart, not now, nor in the future. We can go abroad, to any place where no one knows us. My reason was collapsing. Kaysen, stop talking. Why can't you give me a chance? Why? I couldn't say it. But I knew I couldn't stay any longer. My thoughts were in chaos and all I could hear in the world was the sound of my heart beating again and again. I picked up my bag in a panic and left. Downstairs in the company, I walked so hurriedly that I bumped into a solid chest. Sorry. Sister. Ryan supported me. After a long while, he said with difficulty, it's been so long, but Ryan still refused to call me aunt. There was a bruise at the corner of his eye, and his suit was full of wrinkles. He looked really messy. He should have just been beaten up. I felt much more relieved. I wiped away my tears and threw my bag hard at him. You unfilial son. How did you make yourself like this? And your brother, he's your brother. How could you do this to him? Ryan coughed exaggeratedly twice and covered his chest. I'm so uncomfortable. Stop pretending. He straightened his body and said dejectedly, I'm not pretending. I'm suffering because I miss you. I glared at him. Ryan, have you forgotten how I educated you? He smiled casually. You taught me that if you want something, you should fight for it yourself. Kaysen didn't allow me to go to you and forbade me to like you, but I just want you. Then I could only get rid of him. What's wrong with me? And over the years, he hasn't treated me any better. Don't be deceived by him. Ryan looked at me deeply. The immaturity in his eyes had faded and they were filled with the aggression of a mature man. Then educate me in the way you used to treat a child again. I've grown up. I'm going to pursue you. I felt like I was going crazy. 3 years Kaysen had learned to show weakness and Ryan had learned to be assertive. Everything had changed yet was also the same as before. Crazy, they're all crazy. I already didn't know how to turn the situation around. Point 15 When I returned to the villa my face was still burning hot. The servant looked concerned. Madam, don't you have a fever again? I'm fine. I was so upset that I threw myself into the quilt. I was actually made blush and my heart raced by the confessions of these 2 brats. It must be because I hadn't been in a relationship for too long. If I stayed any longer I was afraid that I would really waver. Since I couldn't control it then I'd just run away. Early the next morning I booked a plane ticket and flew directly to Las Vegas. In the glamorous and dissipated night, I leaned in the arms of a handsome blonde guy and drank. 2 Muscular hunks were dancing pole dance in front of me. The restlessness in my heart finally dissipated a bit. Keep going. I stuffed a stack of banknotes into the handsome guy's waistband. The handsome guy immediately enthusiastically gave me a passionate kiss. I was really into it when the door was suddenly kicked open. Kaysen sneered for a moment. All of you, get out. The several male models immediately scattered and fled. What are you doing? I stood up drunkenly to stop them jumping up and down in anxiety. Kaysen pulled me heavily into his arms and grasped my waist and kneaded it. Vivian, I gave you time to accept. I wasn't giving you time to find someone else. Ryan opened a bottle of wine and poured it directly on himself. The amber liquid soaked through the thin fabric and his well-defined abdominal muscles were faintly visible. Sister likes to play like this, huh? I'll serve you better than them. My mind finally sobered up and my legs went weak. Why are you here? The two of them were rarely in such tacit agreement and said in unison, to catch you.